Soft pastels are great for impressionism. You can draw with them in a fairly normal way using just the end of the pastel stick, but you can also use the entire side to create a big surface area and really fill in an area. You can use just the very edge of one of the points to get some fine detail, and you can kind of twist the pastel around to get a bunch of different lines. And one of the best features of pastels is the way that they blend together as you add multiple layers of color on top. So you can smudge in color with your finger. You can also move other colors around with the stick of pastel itself. So let's get started with our impression of some autumn trees in a forest. We call this impressionism because this is not going to look like a realistic forest, but people are going to be able to understand you're creating a forest when this is finished. So I'm going to start off with some fall colors and scumble them into the top third of my paper. Once the color is applied, I'm going to use my finger to blend them all into one another and sort of blend it down the paper a little bit as well. It's going to help to give that smoky illusion of fog. Now we're picking up our black pastel and simply adding a few lines. These are going to be our furthest away trees, and they don't need to be thick, they don't need to be detailed, just a couple lines, different sizes, and blend them in. Then we'll go back on top in that third to half of the page and scumble in another layer of our tree colors. You can see I've sort of gone this ombre look from yellow to orange to red to brown, but you can put these trees in any order you want. As long as you're using fall colors, it's going to look great together. After I've scumbled it in, I'm going to go back in with my finger and once again blend these colors together. Now, you guessed it, we're going back with the black chalk pastel and adding in some more lines. This is another layer of trees. They're still really far away, so they don't need any sort of detail added to them, but they're helping to create the illusion of depth. And we're going back in with exactly the same technique, scumbling in more color and lightly blending them in. Now for our next row of trees. These ones are getting a little bit more detailed because they are closer to us. Anything that's closer to us, you'll be able to see in a more vibrant, saturated tones. So this one's with a much more saturated black, but also more detailed. So the detail that I'm adding is that some of these trees are going to have some branches, and there's also a little bit of attention to the fact that trees are thicker toward the base. Still, these trees are not detailed by any means. You want to keep it simple. You do not have to draw in every single branch, and in fact, if you do, it will take away from the overall image. So keep it simple, you're just adding in a bit more detail. And then we're right back to the same old pattern of scumbling over the top, keeping it to the sort of top third or top half of your canvas, and we're adding in those colors and then very, very lightly blending them together. We don't want to smudge all of those black branches away. So just lightly blending in and then tapping away the excess. Now these trees are the ones that are closest to us. So I am taking my time I'm going a little bit slower than I was with some of the other ones, thinking a bit more about placement and about the shape of a tree. So trees typically, as I said, thinner towards the top of the trunk, thicker towards the base of the trunk, and then adding in a couple branches, still keeping it very simple. So once your trees are all sketched into place, I'm going to pick up that yellow pastel and I'm going to do a different technique. I'm dashing in these little tiny lines. In some spots, it's going to move some of the pastel pigment around and sort of blur and blend it together. And in other spots, it's going to give a little dash, a little fleck of yellow. I'm doing it all the way from my yellow tree to my brown tree, and then I will pick up my next color and start again. So I'm adding in just these tiny little flecks of color all the way through. This is helping to blend my picture all together and bring harmony to it so that there isn't just yellow on the left side of the page. You can sort of find yellow danced throughout. There isn't just brown towards the right, it is also danced all the way around. Thinking about that concept of impressionism, obviously these little flecks are giving the impression of leaves. Do they look like actual leaves? No. Does our brain understand the implication here, implying that they're leaves? Yes. Things are looking pretty good and we have some depth, but we're going to add in a new color. You might be shocked, but we're adding in blue. We're actually adding the illusion of sky or something far off in the background after we've added in all these things in the foreground. Seems a little bit backwards, and that's because pastels don't work the same way as something like acrylic paint. So what I'm doing is I've found sort of my base of the leaves. And I'm roughing in a little bit of this sky color that I've chosen to give the illusion of sky peeking through the branches and the base of the tree, and even up here at the top a little, just having some little flecks of that blue where the sky would be peeking through the leaves. Less is always more, so don't overdo this and don't feel like you need to get every single little space. We don't know how many rows of trees are in this forest, and maybe you can't see much sky at all. That's totally fine. Blend where needed and take a few steps back every once in a while. Sometimes seeing art from far away is super helpful. Now we're going to do the same thing, adding in a little bit of ground, the illusion of ground. So ground we often associate with green. There probably would be some green in our forest, so I'm starting by adding in just a little bit of green. But there's also going to be lots of fallen leaves. So I'm going in with those same colors we used in our trees, and I'm just using the side of my pastel to plop in some color. There's not really any method to this, just what you naturally think is going to look good. This is giving this implication of piles of leaves or bushes or things in the background, maybe additional trees that are smaller. Our second last step is to just go in to those trees, those few trees we have at the very front of the forest. And we're going to give them a little bit more detail because they are the closest to us. So I'm adding in a bit of black to really emphasize that they are the closest ones, they are in the foreground, and adding a little bit of detail to them by adding some stripes to imply bark or some branches. The branches don't all have to be attached. Feel free to sort of break them off as the leaves might be peeking through. Go slow and play around until you feel it's right. The last thing we're going to add in is my favorite part of art, highlights. And this is continuing to add some detail to our trees. I don't want you to worry about where the highlights would actually be. For now, just pick up some white and plop in a few highlights. We're not doing a continuous line. This is a broken line, and it's just flecks of light bouncing off these trees. You can also go right into the background and add in some more of those tree shapes. The white gives this interesting concept. It sort of looks like a bit of a birch tree. Maybe it's further away. It's not jumping out at us though and looking like trees that are closest to us. And the white has an interesting way of pulling the pigment through it. So it's not a pure white, it's kind of a muddied white, which gives an interesting look. And here's my 6-year-old daughter showing off her beautiful forest creations. I've included a second example, but I'm not going to talk through this one. This is just to sort of watch and follow along, if you're interested. Have fun creating.
Do you ever so feel like you really want to do something and you're not gonna mess it up, but then you mess it up a lot?
100% of the time. I almost never do something the way I want to, but I just keep trying until I get happy about something.
Happened to me once.
Really? Happens to me a lot. Like right now, I was like, whoops, I did not mean to do that, and this went in the bad direction, and I'm not super happy about it, but it's okay. I'm just gonna keep going.
Twice because it happened.
Yeah?
Right.
My biggest thing is I'm just gonna keep going. I'm not gonna stop, even if I get a bit disappointed with how it's turning out.
There. This is my other rainbow, but I'm gonna add. Can I use the white?